All right, hello everyone. This is the last session of the track in the day. How tired are you? I'm tired. Yeah, we could do exercises. Do you want to do exercises? Yeah? All right, everyone stand up. Come on, this will help everyone, I swear. It's been a long day. It's 5:25? Yeah, it's crazy. All right, let's do like what, 5, 10 squats? I know we're all engineers, we're not athletes. Let's do 5, 10, 20, 5. All right, 5. All right, with me. Who's counting? Ray, you want to count? All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. Oh, thank you. I'm simultaneously slightly warm and slightly cold, which is going to be strange. All right, so my talk is all about the cost versus value of attacks, the economics of attacks. I was told that this was a boring title, so I changed the title to How Much It Costs to Attack You, which is essentially what we're talking about. But how much does it cost to attack you? Do you know? Like, if it cost nothing, would you know? Like, that's kind of important to know, because if it costs nothing, then I might just attack you just to see what I get out of you. But figuring out the return rate on an attack, it takes a little bit of math and a little bit of understanding of the inputs to those equations. So when we're talking about rate of returns for different things, you need different equations, and let's, for the sake of example, use something like a carnival game, because it's similar to what we're talking about in attacks. You have a chance of success, you have a value in the prize you get, and you have the cost it takes to actually play the game. And these are the inputs that we're actually looking for when we're talking about attacks. So given a game like this, let's start off with the cost. Now this is obviously contrived, so I can make up whatever cost I want. Let's say this is $1. I think actually most carnival games right now are obscenely priced at like $5 or something. It's like they just smack you in the face about how much they're trying to rip you off. So now the value is something you need to decide for yourself. Now, it's not necessarily the value of this toy. The value is not necessarily what you could pay on Amazon for it, because it's here, it's now, the value is different. You might not need a pink gorilla, in which case the value was just about 0. Or you might have 2 kids tugging on your leg, in which case the value of providing them this fantastic pink gorilla that you so skillfully won in front of them might be fairly high. So you need to figure out your own value, and same with companies, you figure out your own value similarly, based on whether or not anyone's tugging on your pant leg. Now the chances of winning. This is where this example breaks down, because carnival games are never this straightforward. But for the sake of example, we're going to count up all the winning cups, count up all the losing cups, and calculate a percentage, a chance of success. Now, in this example, this is calculated at 10%. In reality, obviously, it's much, much worse. There are no walls. There are shenanigans in play. Some of the winning cups might have springs that launch your ball out. I don't know. Don't play these games. They're awful. Now, to calculate our return here, we want to multiply the value by the chance of success, divide it by the cost, and then subtract our initial investment, which is essentially 100%. So when we get out of that is the rate of return if we play this over time. So for the example that I laid out, so we have a value of $10. It's a 1 in 10 chance of winning, and it costs us $1. So we subtract our initial investment 100%, then we get a 0% rate of return. That's not bad. It means that you're paying what it's worth over time. If you play this enough, you will eventually get enough pink gorillas to outweigh or to offset the cost. But now if the value increases, the output changes. So if the value increases to $20, your rate of return over time is 100%. This is a good place to be. When you find these particular scenarios, you want to keep playing over and over and over again, because you will end up being very, very rich in pink gorillas or money, whatever your form of currency is. Now on the opposite end of that, if the value or the chance decreases, your return is going to be lower. This is where a lot of carnival games want to be. They want you to go broke, and they want all your money. Now, if the cost also goes up, then the cost versus value is way out of whack. The more you keep playing these games, the quicker you'll go broke. So we make these calculations all the time, whether or not we're using equations like this or we're just using gut feel. When we're at a supermarket or Best Buy or anything like that, we've got physical money, that's our cost. We're assessing the value of something on the shelf. If it is valuable enough, then we pay that amount and take it outside the store. Now we do this also in other things, while at work, in relationships, or as a parent. Now if any of you have parents and you're trying to teach your kids how to tie their shoes, and you've got 2 untied shoes in front of you, is the value of you stopping to help them learn how to tie their shoes one more time greater than the cost of being late? You make those decisions a lot, all over the place. If the value is greater, then you do it. If it's not, then you just tie the shoes for them and you move on. Attackers do this too. This is why breaches and attacks are exploding right now. The cost of an attack is dirt cheap and the value is astronomical. This is true for almost all types of attacks. So, who am I? So, should you trust me at all, now that I've already brought you in here? My name is Jarrod Overson. I'm a generic web dork. I'm a director at Shape Security and a Google developer expert. Ray, actually, you're in the audience. I hear Microsoft has an MVP type program as well. Yeah, I could be a Microsoft. That's a whole different topic, guys. Sorry. Yeah. I'm also an old school video game hacker. If you ever played like StarCraft, Total Annihilation, Fallout back in the day, if you ever broke those games, used map hacks or editors or things like that, you might have been using my tools. And that was my first foray into the back and forth with an entity trying to thwart what you're trying to do. You can find me at JS Overson almost everywhere. That is what I looked like when I had more hair and didn't have glasses. I don't think I'm going to be updating that ever. Oh, yes, I have to do this every time because every time I mention that I work at Shape, I get a bunch of blank stares in the audience because we're not cool like Microsoft or Twitter or Facebook or Netflix. You can't take a picture with Shape and share it to your friends of the food that you're eating. But have you ever heard of the company YKK? Some people have. I guarantee that virtually everyone in this room uses their product on a daily basis because YKK makes virtually all zippers in the entire world. If you look at your zippers right now, your zippers, not my zippers, you'll probably see YKK on them, on pants, shirts, backpacks, whatever else. Anyway, long story short, Shape is the YKK of web security. We're virtually everywhere. You probably have run code that I once wrote today. So we're relevant, but you just don't know our name because we're YKK-ish. So cost versus value in security. Now it's important to also differentiate manual work and automation. Now when we talk about an attack, there is no attack that exists where you can go up to a button, press it, walk away, and get money pouring all over you. So there is always some aspect of manual work and some aspect of automation with every attack. And usually attacks walk this path back and forth. And automation can be anything from like a port scan to a Google search to using Burp Suite or some sort of fuzzing tool or Puppeteer, Google, anything like that. And then manual work is basically everything else. Everything that can't be covered by an automation tool or is specially important enough to be handled by a person. Now these are important to differentiate because they cost very, very different amounts. Manual work is sufficient when the value is high or when there is no possible other option and you assume that the outcome is going to be valuable. Manual work cannot scale when the value is reduced. Automation, on the other hand, is the exact type of solution to something that isn't as valuable as it once was. This is the same sort of stuff all business and across all industry is talking about. We're all moving towards automating everything. Of course, the criminal ecosystem is going to be doing the same thing. As stuff becomes too expensive to do by hand, you automate it. And automation works until it costs too much. And then you see this back and forth. You see this seesaw flipping back and forth, and you want to be able to adjust that in order to figure out how to deflect attacks. So, if there are no defenses in place, costs are negligible. So now think about back to that carnival game example. If it costs $0 to play, you would just play it until you won everything. This is why this is important, because if it costs too little to attack you, then people will attack you just to see what they get out of it. And if they're getting anything out of it, they're going to continue attacking you until they get as much as they possibly can. Now you add defenses. And every time you add a defense, you force a generational shift in the attacks. The cost of entry to those new generations is expensive. And the more defenses you add, the more expensive it is to attack you. But we know, because we are all technologists who've been around for a while, that the cost of entry to anything technological decreases over time. So once you get to this point and you're all happy, just by doing nothing, the cost of entry to all those generations of attack tools has decreased and everything is advanced. So by doing nothing, the tables have tipped away from your favor all over again. Now you combine that with the fact that we are all working with the sole responsibility of inflating our company's value, which means that the company gets more valuable, which means that everything inside the company gets more valuable, and you get this pull back and forth that is wildly not in our favor. The cost versus value of everything is just constantly in flux and always pulling away from where we want it to be. This is causing massive iteration on the attacker side. Increased sophistication of tools, marketplaces, services, everything that can plug together in order to make sure this stays as cheap as possible. You get massive sophisticated attacks that cost very little to perform. And that is a really crappy place for all of us to be in, and it's not getting better. The security, I hope most of us understand, is not a binary thing. You don't hire a security team and all of a sudden become secure. You don't purchase a vendor and they don't have a silver bullet that works until a silver bullet doesn't work and then you move on to somebody else. All of these things are just a gradient on the friction that you are applying to an attacker. And friction is cost. We use those terms with user experience. Same terms can be used for the attack landscape. So let's say you don't patch anything ever. What you've done is just make it trivially easy for script kiddies to attack you. You'll just take a scan of all the services you have, all the versions that are running. You look up all the known vulnerabilities for all those versions. You find all the known exploits for those vulnerabilities, and bam, you're done. So obviously that's not where you want to be, but you can have something like a policy of patching within 3 months. This is actually substantially better because it means that you are only vulnerable to the latest vulnerability and only for a window of 3 months. Or you could patch on day 0. As soon as the vulnerability and the subsequent patch are announced, you apply all those patches, and then you make it extremely painful and expensive for an attacker to attack you. They have to find their own vulnerabilities. They have to find their own 0 days. That is a position that not many attackers can be in. That's a level of extreme sophistication that attackers need to be in. But it's okay to not be there because it's really expensive. You just have to know that you're not there, and you have to understand the trade-offs you're making on that gradient as you fluctuate up and down. And it's going to fluctuate up and down on its own, like we already went over. So you need to constantly assess what those trade-offs are and assess whether or not those are still appropriate trade-offs for you to be making in your company. There are also some threats that can't be patched away. This is the OWASP automated threats. Everyone familiar with OWASP? I think we've talked about it a few times today. The Open Web Application Security Project. Wow, coming up with acronyms on the top of your head on a stage is really hard. So these are the OWASP automated threats, and they look like they're prioritized because the numbers are all messed up. They're actually alphabetized by the attack, which is just strange. Copied this off the wiki, but it's basically this stuff that an attacker can abuse that you have to keep open. Things like account creation. You're never going to go to your product owner and be like, I'm sorry, I don't think we should allow any more accounts. No one's going to say okay to that. I mean, that would be a great way to completely eliminate account creation fraud, but that's not going to happen. You have to keep your account creation open. But attackers will abuse those and try to get anything they can out of these open endpoints in order to figure out what they can extract out of you. We're going to go over a single attack in detail. I work a lot with credential stuffing. That is a very hot topic nowadays. Credential stuffing, for anyone who's not 100% up to date, is the automatic replay, is the replay of previously breached credentials across other sites or services in order to find out who's reusing passwords. And a lot of people reuse passwords, and there are a lot of breaches. So if I can get your passwords from the past 10 years and just try them over and over again, hopefully not you, but somebody probably in this audience would get exploited. Because I am the first to acknowledge that I have not always been a security person. I've had some pretty poor hygiene in the past. I used to have 3 passwords. There were 3 classes of passwords. The crappy password that you use across everything, then the somewhat okay password that you use for things that have your credit card in them, like Amazon or Best Buy, and then the really, really good password for like banks and email and stuff like that. That's actually a really, really common password policy. That gets you screwed because these services will get breached at some point, and then when your password is out there, it can be used to exploit anything else. So credential stuffing takes 4 steps. You got to get credentials somehow. You have to automate the login because you're not going to sit through and type through hundreds of millions of emails and passwords by yourself. You have to defeat whatever existing defenses there are because there's inevitably something. And then you need to distribute globally, or at least make it look as though your traffic is distributed globally. So getting credentials at one point in time was actually somewhat difficult. You needed to know the right people, run in the right groups, pay a lot of money, or do the breaching yourself. Now you can go to a site like raidforums.com and download almost a terabyte of credentials for virtually nothing. This is the post that announced the mega leak, collections 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and the anti-public mega dump. And that was about 2.3 billion credentials, unlocks for 8 credits, which is about $2.50, which was $2.50 more than I had on this account. But that's okay because it was just hiding a torrent link, and there were 5 other posts on the forum that had that same torrent link. So you can get 2.3 billion credentials for literally nothing. And these are breaches all the way back, as far as I could tell, from I think 2008, 2009. I think the Elance breach was one of the first ones I recognized there. And one of the more recent ones is like CD Projekt Red. Anyone who play video games, play The Witcher, things like that, those guys, their forums had been breached, and those were included in there as well. So a whole range, a decade worth of credentials. Now, if accessing publicly accessible shady websites is not your thing, then just go to Twitter. And you can follow a bot like this, which is advertising dumps. So you can follow this right now. This is a real screenshot. You can get daily updates of whatever combo lists are being advertised on the internet. Combo list is basically a text file with username and passwords ready to be used as input to a tool. So credentials are no problem. You get those for basically nothing. Now, high quality credentials are different, but let's not talk about those right now. Let's talk about the base level. Next up, you got to automate the login. This is one such tool that you can use to automate logins. This is FraudFox. This is the ultimate solution to automating because it's a virtualized by default and set up to avoid and bypass browser fingerprinting. Browser fingerprinting is basically IP rate limiting with browser data all mashed together. And because it's virtualized, once you get this all set up, you just plop it on to whatever virtualization cloud service you want to use, and you're ready to go. Next up, you have to defeat the existing defenses. And there is inevitably something there. You probably have seen something like this at some point. Google's reCAPTCHA. This is Google's reCAPTCHA version 2. Version 1 was the squiggly words. Version 3 is actually kind of a completely different product. But you get the swirly swirl and a green check mark if you are okay. If Google doesn't think that you're okay, maybe using Firefox like some sort of weirdo, then it pops open a grid of pictures. And you have to basically answer some questions in order to make Google's machine learning systems all the better. You got to figure out what a crosswalk is, what a street sign is, things like that. And once you get through enough, Google eventually says, all right, but use Chrome next time. Now, the problem with, actually, you know what? This is fantastic at detecting malicious automated traffic. I work at a company whose sole goal is to be better than this. Google's reCAPTCHA is fantastic. The problem is everybody uses it. Now think back to, put a hacker hat on and think like a hacker. Think like an attacker. Now you have a neighborhood of 1,000 houses, all with 1,000 unique, really, really good locks. And you have another neighborhood, all with the same exact lock. Now as an attacker, are you gonna bypass one lock that gets you one house or one lock that gets you 1,000 houses? The answer is obvious there. And of course, when something like this is that obvious, it breeds a marketplace of solutions like this. This is death by CAPTCHA. This is one of dozens of CAPTCHA solvers. There are actually so many CAPTCHA solvers that if you Google CAPTCHA solvers, Google's algorithms will find all the CAPTCHA solvers and everything written about CAPTCHA solvers and propagate the top 10 CAPTCHA solvers to its answer box. So this is not hard to get to. You don't have to be some sort of shady hacker to get this stuff. So this is $1.39 for 1,000 solved CAPTCHAs, not CAPTCHA attempts, solved CAPTCHAs, or 99 cents if you're a gold member. So this is already very, very cheap to get what you need, but if that's still expensive, then you can use something like this, XEvil. This is a free tool, API-less tool that you can download that will attempt to break CAPTCHAs. Its success rate is less than using a service like Death by CAPTCHA or 2CAPTCHA, but if you're strapped for cash, then this is better than nothing. And if you have a 50% success rate, you know what you do. You just double the amount of traffic you're sending, and eventually you'll get where you need to be. This is what happens. And then next up, you need to distribute globally. And like I mentioned a little bit earlier, it's not necessarily distributing the code globally, it's distributing where the traffic looks like it's coming from globally. This also used to be somewhat expensive. You had to figure out where to put your code across a bunch of machines or get botnets or get exploited Microsoft Windows XP machines. But now you have so many cloud service providers with the ability to just put your code anywhere across the globe whenever you want. And if that's not enough, you have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of free proxies that you can then funnel all the traffic to in order to make it look like your traffic is coming from somewhere other than a single point. Because you can't make it look like it's coming from one IP address, because thanks to firewalls a billion years ago, if you have 100,000 requests coming from one IP address, you're gonna stick out like a sore thumb and you're gonna get swatted down very quickly. So you have to distribute to make yourself look like you're more natural. So the cost of this attack right now, if you wanted to go home tonight and get started, is nothing for 2.3 billion credentials. Now you're all developers here. You could probably develop your own script or configure your own tool, but if you're spending time is money, you might as well just spend some money and get something configured for you. There are marketplaces for that. You probably pay about 50 bucks depending on the service you want to attack. You just get that, you get started much more quickly. Now we could use XEvil, but again, we're entrepreneurial. I mean, why should we waste our time with a substandard success rate when we can pay $139 and get 100,000 solved CAPTCHAs? Now we want 100,000 because we want a substantial attack that gets us something, right? And then we can get 1,000 global IPs for virtually nothing, for actually, I think, literally nothing. But if you spend a few bucks, then you can tailor the demographics a little bit more and have less likelihood of getting blocked. So it's less than $200 for 100,000 account takeover attempts. Now, we have the cost. It's less than $0.25 penny per request. What's the value? The value, obviously, as I think you probably imagine, fluctuates depending on the service you're attacking. You can browse sites like this, dark web account marketplaces, in order to find out what accounts are going for. This is one of the more popular ones. You can search for Wells Fargo accounts, SunTrust accounts, Apple, Airbnb, Marriott, IKEA, Epic Games if you want some really sweet Fortnite skins. Now the value of these accounts differs for the seller, but they all kind of normalize around some similar criteria. Amazon.com accounts, by this seller, Amazon.com accounts are priced based off of the last purchase price in that Amazon.com account. So for an Amazon.com account that has the last purchase price of $613, we sell for about $15. A Sephora.com account with over 4,000 loyalty points will sell for $22.60. So if you have hundreds or thousands of these accounts, you're gonna be making some money. Now this is also actually just selling the account, not even any of the downstream fraud that can occur once you own that account. So even if you're just doing a credential stuffing attack just to get accounts, that has value in itself that you can just realize very, very quickly. So we have values ranging between a couple of dollars is what I've seen up to about $150. Smaller amounts for less valuable services, game accounts that have few skins in them, high amounts for services that allow you to transfer money, because that helps in money laundering. So you get a success rate, what we've seen, between about 0.2 and 2%, which is variable depending on the quality of the credentials that you've got. But 0.2 and 2% is generally the number that we repeat. And a cost per attempt is less than a quarter of a penny. So we're looking at a return at the low end of 100% and at the high end of about 150,000%. You don't need to be Warren Buffett to know whether or not this is a good deal. This is where we are right now, and we are on the wrong side of this. We should all be attackers. Yes, somebody said it. We are not making enough money to be protecting against these people. But this is fueling massive, massive iteration and evolution because there's so much money there. You see the tools. So I remember I was talking about the cost of entry. In this specific case, cost of entry and the generations of attacks are different for the attacks. In credential stuffing, it's basically new tools that are created that make it easier to get past existing defenses. So this is Sentry MBA. This is a very, very old one. This is a basic tool that does basic HTTP requests, but it's optimized for the credential stuffing use case. So it takes in combo lists, it rotates through proxies, it does a lot of things that you just don't want to do, or you would have to do yourself if you're using something like curl or wget. Then as soon as these things got blocked, then you would get tools like Browser Anti-Detect, which is a Chrome and Firefox plugin that allows you to randomize the fingerprints so that when you have something that's trying to look at your fingerprint in order to see the similarities in traffic, you can just randomize it and then bypass all that completely. And then you keep on going from there. You've got fingerprint marketplaces now that you can purchase hundreds of thousands of fingerprints and use legitimate fingerprints through a fingerprint switcher to go through that process. So randomizing is not enough now. You have to actually have legitimate looking fingerprints. If you're on iOS or something, you should be reporting that you have iOS-y like things. So rather than randomizing that yourself, just get somebody else's iOS fingerprint. There's the human emulator in the middle, which is specializes in actually making traffic look like it is being manipulated by a human. All of these tools are trying to drive closer and closer to imitating real human behavior. So from their demographics, from their traffic origins, from their behavior, from the clients they're using, everything. If you were here earlier for one of the talks, talked about the Illuminati network and the OLA VPN. That's a way to basically outsource the usage of residential IP addresses to a legitimate company. So if you want to look like you're coming from an actual home, you can just do that as well by proxying through those channels. So how to affect cost? So there's not exactly a silver bullet at the end of this, and I apologize, but we'll go through some examples. So there's millions and millions of spooky marketing dollars talking about bots and botnets and super shady tools and things like that, but those are just the symptoms. Everything that we are able to see on our servers, on our network, are just the symptoms of something else. And if you treat the symptoms, you're not going to be affecting the source of those symptoms. You need to target the person or the group behind those attacks in order to have any chance of getting ahead. And it's not as simple as just blocking an IP address or a bot or a tool or a botnet or anything like that. You actually have to target what is going to cost the attacker the most to change over and over and over again. And it might be the tool for novice attackers. They might not be skilled enough to iterate towards other tools quickly, so they'll just move on to softer targets. For other attackers, it might be the services that they use. It might be going so far as damaging their reputation on the dark web, which ends up being kind of a fun little game because you're trying to reverse search where all this is coming from and looking for clues in order to figure out how you can properly damage this person enough so that it is just too expensive to continue attacking you. What we do, and what I have found particularly effective, is by focusing on sabotaging the software development lifecycle of an attacker. The software development lifecycle looks just like our software development lifecycles. You have phases that progress, and they start with something like planning or gathering requirements. For an attacker, it's what are you trying to attack? What URLs do you need to hit? What data do you need? What services do you need to integrate with? What is your path to value? And they go through, they probably have Scrum Masters, I don't know, but it looks very similar to what we go through. And then you go through the development phase. Development is exactly what you would think it would be. Now, think about how you develop. Now, when you are, let's say, Java programmers here. So when you're creating a web application or REST API or something like that, you invest in a framework, maybe Spring or something like that. If there are Node people here, maybe you invest in Koa or Express. You're investing in a platform, and I want you to keep that in mind. There's a lot of work being done here in order to get to the end. For an attacker, it might be investing in a tool, maybe Chrome or Sentry MBA or something along those lines. Then you go through testing. These are scripts that need to be running on their own for days, weeks, or even months. You don't want to babysit them. You want to make sure they're actually working, so you go through the testing phase. Integration is the last phase before release. This is where you make sure that everything's working properly, making sure edge cases are handled, making sure that your credit is topped up in the APIs you're using. The final stage here is the release, which we all know because that is the only thing people care about in our companies. That's what they're all looking for. And for an attacker, it's the same. That's the attack. Now, why is this important? Because these first 4 stages are pure cost incurring stages. There is no value realized in those first 4 stages. We all know that really, really well. When you have product managers and executives breathing down your neck waiting for that next release, because that's the only thing they care about, because that's where value is realized. And the same thing is true on the attacker side. So now think about back to when I was mentioning your commitment to a framework. Now, if you have, let's say, a silver bullet against headless Chrome, if you deploy this, you will never, ever, ever be bothered by headless Chrome or anything that uses headless Chrome ever again. If you have that deployed all the time, all you've done is tell the attacker at the planning phase, hey, don't worry about headless Chrome. You have saved the attacker time and money, which is the last thing you want to be doing. What would be more valuable is for you to be detecting this, of course, but to have virtually nothing mitigating. You have the attacker going through the process of developing everything they need to develop, and then as soon as they get to the release phase, you squash them there. Not with your silver bullet, with something, anything that would work, because your goal is to just keep on redirecting them to the first 4 stages over and over and over and over and over again. Now think about how infuriating that would be as a developer. You're spinning cycles. Now also think about the success rate I was talking about with some of these attacks. Credential stuffing or whatever else. They're not 100% successful. You can let some of them through, and that's what you want to do. You want to let just enough through that they think they're onto something, and maybe you block them with something simple, and they go back like, oh, I should have accounted for that. They go through the whole process again, and you squash them again. And you keep on squashing them with your bag of tricks until they're gone, or you have to use a silver bullet and they move on to something else, and you go through the process all over again. This is how you can deter attackers and push them off to softer targets. So I know this is all kind of fuzzy and hard to understand, so I'll give you a real-world example of something that we actually did about 15 years ago. So we're really, really good at this. It's a long, long time ago. No, circa 2015. I keep on bringing this up because this was back when I was still engineering and I was closer to this, and it was probably the funnest last thing I did before I went into management. So we, oh, poor guy, manager. So the scenario is we've got a credential stuffer and an account taker over and a big US retailer. So basically a marketplace online, you buy things, blah, blah, blah. So the problem here is that we had an attacker who was very, very sophisticated. Now, Fortune 500 retailers, you can imagine very, very high value targets. If you have a specific goal to extract value from that, you're not going to go away. There are multiple tiers of attackers. Tier 1, you got script kiddies, you knock them over relatively easy, you don't worry about them again. You have experienced attackers who can iterate a little bit more. Then you get the advanced tool developers, people developing their own things. And then you have the people who are damn well determined to get what they want to get out of your service. And those are the ones that cause the most frustration. And that's eventually what companies get to until they get rid of them. So this guy had been attacking and retooling for months and would not go away. So what we did is that we had an ability to send targeted custom payloads to individual attackers. This is something we had developed, but we hadn't yet used because no one had gotten to the point where that was necessary. So we deployed a targeted custom JavaScript bundle to this particular attacker, which then ran our code on his machine, which is kind of like tipping the tables. And it's like, screw you. This allowed us to inspect the APIs he or she was overwriting in order to see what the code was that he or she was using. And we got this code delivered back up to us in real time so we could see everything the attacker was doing in real time in the browser. Console logs, comments, typos, everything. Now think about things like comments and console logs. When you enter them in your code, you don't expect behavior to change, right? There shouldn't be any reason why behavior would change when you add a comment. But now what this enabled us to do, because we were observing this and we had this data coming back to us, we could make decisions based off of the content of this code. So we would do things like when we saw it, and when he was going through a retooling process, everything would work, but as soon as a comment was added or subtracted or a console log was added, things would break in weird ways. Now, if that happened in your code, what would you expect? Like, it's clearly because of a log statement or comment. Why would that possibly be the case? Maybe in a log statement, maybe there's some sort of weird getter on the object that you're outputting, and then you go down that route. Maybe the console log method is instrumented and you need to figure out what's going on there. This is what we were trying to do. We were trying to drive the attacker down a path that was not fruitful. And after just a few days of doing this, we have never seen that attacker again. So we professionally piss people off at our company. So the plan was, what we did after this, we built up defenses based on the tool that was being used. Because there were some typos in that code, we could do a Google search. When you're Google searching typos, you get the results you're looking for really well. We were able to find the source code that this tool was based off of, and then with the pieces that we were getting from the browser side, able to piece together what he or she had changed. So we're able to build up more defenses around that in order to make things more resilient. And then we started productionalizing some of the variable feedback. And then we were making it easier to turn things on and off, be more dynamic on our side, and then generalizing everything so that it could be repeated over and over and over again. So how much does it cost to attack you? I can't answer that, but I can at least tell you how to go about learning that. First off, you got to address all the low-hanging fruit. If you have versions that are vulnerable or ports that are open, or anything that is easy to exploit, take care of that. Because if you don't, then your cost is pretty low and you don't need to do anything else. After you've taken care of that, hack yourself. For the problems that are plaguing you or the plot problems that you're most worried about, figure out what it takes to attack you. Especially when it comes to credential stuffing and automated stuff, you got a bunch of web developers in your companies and QA testers. Figure out how hard it is to actually do this. If it's very easy and they don't have to do anything, then the cost you've already seen is virtually nothing. So you need to figure out how to up those costs and then repeat. Because like I said, all of this is constantly in flux, and by doing nothing, everything is tipping away from our favor just naturally. So thank you very much. Any questions? I need a microphone. Or you can come up here. Yeah.
So yeah, you inspired me to change careers. But really, I was wondering how many people do actually get caught doing, I mean, if you're not living in Russia, obviously, if you're living in the Western world, what percent of people, or what amount
of people?
No, percent it's hard, but
that's hard to say, especially from my perspective in the company I'm at, because we would never be the one who go after anybody. We would give data to our customers, and then they would pursue any action if necessary. So. Things have amounted to something tangible at the end, but that's beyond usually what I have experience in. Can I get a volunteer runner? Thank you. Crowdsourcing.
So do these economics apply when, I guess, nation states are involved, are trying to attack critical industries? finance, et cetera, right? So, and then what do you do then?
The nation-state attackers and what is commonly dubbed advanced persistent threats, APTs, they're only advanced because they're funded or sponsored by a nation-state, and just like we all know that the longer you're at something, you're eventually going to get through somehow. So when you have a sponsored attacker, the game changes. And if you are under attack by sponsored attackers, then you need to take different precautions. Still addressing cost versus value is important, but you're not going to divert an attacker to a softer target because they are targeting you specifically.
So certain other precautions, like in short, can you just talk a little bit about like what kind of
what kind of things to do to dissuade advanced persistent attackers? I think that's a whole nother talk. Sorry.
So at the end, you mentioned that in that example that you'd been attacked repeatedly by the same person. I'm not really that familiar with any of this, but like, how did you know that it was one person and that it was the same person?
Well, we were able to see similarities in the retooling attempt. So we're not necessarily 100% sure that it was one individual, but it was some organized entity that was issuing the same type of attack. So when it comes to things like credential stuffing, especially for customers that have a lot of defenses in place, individual attackers are going to leave different traces of their attack because they have to get by defenses in unique ways. So it's unlikely that you're going to have something that is just completely invisible among the masses. You'll have campaigns. We might not necessarily be able to attribute that to an individual or an entity or even a region, but we were able to draw a line around it.
I've worked with APTs at a prior company, and we developed some honeypots in order to at least see where they were traversing our network. At what point on the cost structure for us does that look like something that's viable? Because on the script kiddie side, that's not really something you want to ramp up. When would you say you should start looking at that?
Honeypots, I think, are good at alerting and detecting and raising flags. Depending on how you're either honeypotting or even tar pitting, depending on what your strategies are, it's unique. And I think going down this route, I think we would probably end into a wholly different discussion. But they're just different strategies. But honeypots, I think, are good at detection and showing you what risks are out there. But the more sophisticated people are probably going to bypass most trivial honeypots, or not fall into them anyway. Any other questions?
How do you gauge what percentage of successful attempts you're going to let through before you start, adding in countermeasure? Do you say, okay, 30% of the attempts are going to get through? So
it depends on the customer. Some customers are more tolerant, some customers aren't, and sometimes we'll let a small portion that is rate limited, of course, so the attacker thinks that they've gotten under a rate limit and they feel like they're doing a good job, and then eventually, once we hit a predefined number, then we'll knock them down from there. So it is really still about dragging it out and making the attacker think that they have bypassed defenses.
Okay, firstly, thanks for a really cool talk. My question was, how do you detect the attackers are getting into your system? What kind of alert or monitoring tools do you use generally? Or
that, I think, is wholly intellectual property. Sorry. So it's a lame answer, but that's, at least for the stuff that I'm talking about, that's a lot of the bread and butter at Shape.
You said hack yourself. So for an individual, do you recommend downloading that 2 terabyte file and looking for your own username and password? I mean, I feel like you would end up in some FBI list if you did that, or. You know.
I mean, you might, but.
Do you think it's worthwhile doing that though?
What are you going to do? I think when it comes to what you're actually asking, you can just go to Have I Been Pwned and see whether or not you're going to breach there. Okay. Because inevitably these collections, actually collection 1 of that mega leak was on Have I Been Pwned. Troy Hunt wrote about it, was a big stir, and actually that I think was what accelerated the release of collections 2 through 5 and everything else. But a lot of these are also very old. It's an aggregation of a whole lot of dumps. So you can use things like Have I Been Pwned and see whether or not you're in there. You can download that. I don't recommend that one in particular just because it's a lot of duplicate and bad data. The 2.3 billion comes from a very, very small subset of cleaned up, deduped data. And if you find that, then you could download that one. But the one I'm talking about, it's mostly junk.
But downloading that, at least in Europe, is illegal. So you can.
Yes, technically. But I think one of the serious problems that we have as an industry trying to defend ourselves is holding us up to standards that attackers just are not holding themselves to. So when it comes to being able to protect ourselves, that's all public data now. It's on the internet. It's downloadable by anybody. It is absolutely ridiculous that we can't use that easily in order to protect ourselves. So that's a personal opinion, not a company opinion. So take that as you will. Yep. Yep, Have I Been Pwned offers the Pwned Passwords API, which is a free API to do lookups if you wanted to. But the spiraling out a little bit there, once credentials reach raidforums.com, they're very much extracted of a lot of value. Now, when credentials reach the dark web, have already lost a lot of their value because these credentials flow from the original breach and into different private groups. And then eventually, once their value has been extracted, they're sold to others, and eventually it ends up on the dark web, and then eventually ends up on the public web. So really, the stuff that I'm talking about, they are old, and a lot of their value has already been ripped away. You can still get something out of them, but out of 2.3 billion passwords and emails over the course of the past 10 years, it's nothing like having a fresh set of breach credentials from a popular company now.
Yeah. How well does two-factor authentication and those things protect you?
Two-factor authentication is a very effective response to this. It comes with its own set of problems, but is most importantly not a silver bullet. Like I mentioned, with the purpose of credential stuffing, when we're talking over the dark web account marketplace, you can sell accounts even if you haven't actually gotten into and defrauded the owner of that account. And even with two-factor authentication, those valid accounts still have value because people can find ways around that two-factor authentication. If you are using, you can. I mean, one of the simplest ways that I've seen people bypass two-factor authentication. So I have all your information because it's available all over the internet. I have your social data, whatever else. I can just about log into, let's say, your bank account, and then before I press enter, call you up and say, hey, Kittel, I'm from some bank. We've noticed some shady activity on your account. We're going to send you a one-time password. Can you just give that back to us so we can be sure that you are in control of your device? And then this is the social engineering technique and getting somebody before they switch over into questioning what is being done. And if you can get somebody to give back a one-time password over that phone call, then as soon as they log in, they get your one-time password, or they log in, the one-time password gets sent to you, you give it to them, they enter it, and then they're in your account. Like that sounds stupid, but what's cheap and easy wins. And if that works, then they're in and they can do whatever they need to do. Oh, really? A legitimate call from a bank asked for that. That is, Well, it wasn't a question. He said that there was a legitimate call from a bank that I won't say on record unless I already said it, in which case I'm sorry, that asked for the code for an ATM card reset. So if you have banks already setting the precedent that this sort of interaction with customers is okay, then it's very, very easy for attackers to take that over. I mean, I hope, I don't mean to insult you, I hope that is not actually legitimate, and because that is outrageous. But I guess to counter that, whenever you need to have that relationship with a company, always initiate the call and interaction yourself from a secure website or a phone number that you got on the website.
Yes, for the credential stuffing, what's your view on using a password manager to help with the problem?
Yeah, I use password managers. I don't know almost any of my passwords except the one of the password manager. I highly recommend them. The problem is, though, virtually no one uses password managers. I know millions do, but in the grand scheme of things, virtually no one does. One of the things that we actually do at Shape, because we have heavy fingers in a lot of what the browser does, we can see which password managers are being used, and we see fractions of a % in use. What I use, recall of anything that isn't this on a stage is hard. 1Password. Yes.
What would you recommend for a good password?
Whatever it tells me, I don't know. All right, thank you very much, everyone.